Want to know what your dog is thinking?
Have a challenging dog behavior you need help with?
The Dish on Dogs is your source for all your canine questions.
Improve your relationship with your dog and deepen your understanding of your furry friend. Right here on the Dish on Dogs. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another informative edition of the Dish on Dogs. I am your host, Mike Gould, and obviously we're going to be talking about dogs today. Most recently I interviewed one of my old friends and colleagues from the NYPD Canine Unit, who both of us have done 40 years working with animals. He was working in one way, and I went in my way. Behind me, you see pictures of when I had hair, with my toupee on, and now the ultimate. I got also all my memorabilia up here.
You're really aging yourself with 40 years of experience.
Yellow brick from the FBI Academy. So yeah, I'm aging myself. And when I was reminiscing with my friend Bob Schnell, who you got to listen to those episodes, it was really fascinating, the things he's done over the years. But anyway, some of it was sad. You know, he's been recovering bodies for 40 years. Takes a toll on people. I couldn't do it, so I had to, branch off into doing work at Houndstown, home to the happiest dogs on earth. I had a lot of coffee, folks, so bear with me.
All right, let's get to the topic of the show.
I have to introduce my co-pilot, Jackie Bondanza, CEO of Houndstown, USA, home to the happiest dogs. Jackie, it's so nice to be back with you as co-host.
I know, I haven't been here in a couple episodes, so I don't know how things have gone. So Brian, our producer, says the episodes have been making sense.
Anytime I can make sense is good.
That's good.
Right.
All right. We'll see how they come out.
I've been on the road, as you know, opening stores all over the United States. Yes. I've developed some bad habits, and I think it's important for you to know. And this is what better time to make confessions than live on TV. So I'm alone on the road, right? I'm in hotel rooms all over the country. I've developed a bad addiction to Culver's hamburgers. Culver's hamburgers. It's like heroin. I started out in Wixom, then it went to Peoria. So they're Butterburgers. They're called Culver Butterburgers.
All right.
So that's one problem. The next problem I really have, and it's really annoying me. So I'm always kind of censored. I can't, my Brooklyn vocabulary, my NYPD vocabulary. I'm always getting in trouble for using words that are not acceptable. So I developed this bad habit of saying dang. And everywhere I go now, I say dang, dang, dang. And it's really annoying me. I can't get it out of my head.
Well, if it's annoying you, I'm sure that it's really annoying.
It's very annoying.
To listen to it. So let's stay away from that.
Stay away from that. So let's ask the mayor.
Right. So this is an episode not about hamburgers, not about
Butterburgers,
NYPD, but about
Scott Lanny introduced me, just for the record.
Oh, Scott. Yeah. Oh, Scott, you're dead.
Yeah, Butterburger. So now I'm addicted to Culver's. Okay, go ahead.
All right. So today we're going to talk about some common dog myths in a sort of like Ask the Mayor format. And these are some of the dog just sort of ideas that people come to the table with when we see them coming into our stores. Yes. And even franchisees, when they first open their stores, just there are certain misconceptions that I think deserve some discussing, because it's really interesting to talk about how we as humans interpret dog behavior and then sort of spit it back out and make assumptions, right? Because dogs can't talk. We don't know certain things. Right. So want to get through a couple. We might have to end up doing this in 2 episodes.
Oh, we'll see if I don't get too distracted. But what you're talking about is humans projecting. The only way we can understand dogs or any other animal is through the lens of being human. We can't swim underwater. We don't live underwater, so we can't understand what a fish's experience is. We can't fly. And we can't live up in the polar ice cap. We can't live in the Everglades as alligators. So the only thing we can do as humans is view behavior and project human things onto dogs. And this is where our big conundrum is, as owning Houndstowns, is to decipher that from a dog perspective using, guess what? Science, animal science, behavioral science. Not just myths. We watched a program on Lassie or Rin Tin Tin. So I think that is at the core of breaking down the difference between dog and human.
Yeah, and I think there's been a trend for the past decade or so on this concept of anthropomorphism, right?
Oof.
Where it's ascribing human traits to animals. And while there are many benefits to that, right, there are also drawbacks, because when we take it too far, we interact with dogs as if they're human, and they're not. And they have different needs. They have different, different ways they need to live their life. And so the first myth I want to talk about is leash aggression, right? And the misconception that a leash aggressive dog, meaning a dog that's reactive when they're tethered to a leash, that equals a dog being aggressive.
Right. So leash aggression is something that occurs. We've created it. Humans create. So anything that we're going to discuss ever, it's always the humans. Dogs are never wrong. Dogs can't be wrong. And I started teaching people this in this regard. Everyone listening, you, me, Ryan, we've all been 2 or 3-year-old children at one time. That's a fact. That's 100% factual, correct?
I mean, sure, yes.
Well, come on.
Yes.
All right. So that means think of yourself at 2 or 3, what you were capable of doing, what you weren't capable of doing. Then we just say to ourselves, to keep this simple, dogs are eternal 2 or 3-year-old children. They're never evolving beyond that. They're always 2 or 3-year-old children.
Well, I would say that they're even younger than that, right? So it's more like an infant, because 2 or 3-year-old children can understand language and vocabulary and go interpret things a certain way.
Right.
Dogs really don't have that much of a capability.
Exactly. And I was going to go there saying that they're more advanced. So a 2 or 3-year-old child who has opposing thumbs, that can pick things up, that they can follow instruction, they can stand erect, they begin to stand erect, they see things in color for the most part, so they can do all these amazing things. So that's it. They're never more than that. You want to take it a year, I like to consider toddlers that.
Okay.
So now let's think about the 8 million species of animals on Earth. There's only one that we dress up, and that's a dog. Think of it. You don't dress up alligators, you don't dress up pigs, what other animal do we dress up? Like us. So we talked about booties, clothes, all of this crazy stuff. Then think of it this way. What is the only animal that we tie to ourselves? We tether to ourselves. Yeah. Think about it. Elephants? No. Polar bears? No. So it's the dog. So we developed this toxic relationship right from the get-go.
Right, but it's unintentional, because because when we adopt a dog, we bring them into our home. Of course, the dog has to adapt to our world, right? So that we do way too much expecting the dog to adapt to our world instead of us meeting the dog in the middle and adapting to them. So we obviously have to have a way to walk our dogs outside. That's devil's advocate, right? And then so we put a leash on the dog, but it's a completely unnatural experience because leashes are not in the wild, right? So it's not.
So you take away their freedom.
Inherent.
You take their free will. So all animals, including us, in the wild have free will. You can make decisions based on survival or whatever. So dogs, we've removed this free will. So we control the walk, meaning you're going to take a dog where you think he wants to go. You have no idea that he just wants to sniff other dog urine. He wants to sniff. He doesn't want to see flowers necessarily. He doesn't want to see the homes for sale on your block. He wants to smell his environment. But because he's tethered to you, you're fundamentally dragging him all over the place that you want to go, thinking that that's what he wants to do. You take him
right, and there's also a myth that I think that connected to this, that leash walks are the way to exercise your dog. And that's not the case.
No.
In our minds.
Really, the place to exercise dogs are at Houndstown, USA, because when a dog comes to our interactive environment, they're running around from 7 o'clock in the morning to 7 o'clock at night. You would have to run a marathon tethered to your dog to even come close to the amount of exercise the dogs are having untethered. This is huge. So let's go back to the leash aggression. How is it formulated? You don't get a dog, whether you adopt it, rescue it, buy it, and it's leash aggressive the moment you take it for a walk. That never happens.
Right. It's a developed thing.
It's developed by us teaching the dog. So then we'll say, well, Mike, Mayor, how does that happen? And it's a very simple thing. You're walking down your street and your dog sees a squirrel. His natural instinct as a predator is to go chase the squirrel. But what we do, Obviously, we don't want the dog to get run over, so we restrain the dog. We pull him away from it. So that's the beginning of leash aggression. When a dog thinks it has to, lost its freedom, and it has to control its environment. So then, as the dog matures, it's 6 months old, a year, it'll start barking at something, maybe another dog. And then what do we do as humans? We either cross the street, so we make it, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy for the dog. Does that make
so
sense?
the dog is connecting the dots that I bark, the stimulation is removed, right?
He did it. He created
So then
that.
that's reinforcing the behavior.
Absolutely. And then that gets extended inside our house. So if the dog is barking out the window at the mailman, the squirrel, or the landscaper, eventually those items, he barks, and those items disappear. So that's when we talk about territorial aggression, right? So what looks like he's barking at the window, and sooner or later the mailman leaves, the UPS, the landscaper, and the squirrel. They never come into your house. So the dog is creating his own reality. And they formulate, to your point, very quickly. It's not a complicated analysis. They create, I bark, something disappears, and I'm safe.
Right. And the key to changing that, although that's a whole other episode, is correcting the dog in a way that the dog understands and not allowing the dog to do that, right? And that will stop that anxiety. But back to the leash reactivity. So we have and we've seen this a lot, right? When we open our Houndstown facilities and our customers come in. And so a customer comes in, they've got a dog that's kind of like lunging and barking on the leash.
Right.
And in many instances, we've actually been able to conduct an evaluation on the dog and understand that aggression on the leash does not translate to aggression in the play area. Why is that?
Absolutely not. Because again, all mammals, dogs, mammals, we have a flight or fight response. You do, I do, all mammals do. But when you're tied, it would be like me shackling your legs and throwing rocks at you. You have no way to go, so you have a higher level of anxiety. So the answer is to teach dogs, like you said. So they come into our facilities, and you're absolutely right. And this is what separates us, quite frankly, from our competitors. We have a deep understanding of animal science, not what we think dogs should be, but the facts of life. And most recently, we had a situation where Danielle, one of our opening trainers, she detected a German Shepherd came in, and domestic Shepherds happen to be a little more vocal sometimes than other dogs, and they're yappy, a little on the skittish side. So when they walk in on a leash, they present that behavior in our lobby, where most other facilities would not allow you in. We take a little extra time to understand that it's just a fear response. It's a fear response to a stimulation, and he's not confident enough to interact with the dog.
Right. And it's really phenomenal to see when you realize that, and then the dog goes into a play group, and we're able to build a group around the dog, how that behavior actually gets better and more manageable.
Oh, completely. So it's like taking a child, and let's use COVID, for example, because we see a big example of that. So 2 years in a dog's life, which let's just say, for example, we see these COVID dogs coming out. People were locked up with their dogs for the last 2 years. So what most people forget is that dogs are maturing 7 times faster than the human.
Right.
So it seems like 2 years in your life seems like an endless time. Think about a child who didn't come out of his house for 14 years. So that's the analogy we have to use.
Right.
So people are coming out and coming to doggy daycares, and the dog that was 6 months old 2 years ago is now almost 2 years old. So all of these kind of nervous reactions or tics or the lack of proper socialization exist. So we almost have to reintroduce the dog into a world he knows since he was born. When he was born, he's a dog. So he's a pack animal that was born with siblings. Then we removed him and we isolated him. Well-intentioned by everybody. We did it with our own children. And now we have, so even though children are just 2 years old, the dogs are almost 10 years older.
Right.
So we have to reintroduce them.
So, and I think, this happened to my dog. I have a very leash reactive dog, and I just assumed that, and because other people, professionals in the industry told me, of course, before I met you and came to Houndstown, that they labeled her an aggressive dog. That's very dangerous, because the dog's fate could be at stake, right? So if a dog gets labeled dangerous or aggressive and he's actually not, it could be detrimental to the dog's life.
Right. Well, let's talk about Maggie for a second, because Maggie still lives with us. She's probably one of the best. She's probably 13 years old. Mm-hmm. She's probably one of the best dogs I've ever seen, meaning her balance. She is not aggressive. But let's talk about the situation. That was a situation of dog behavior that if we labeled her that forever, she would never, it was an isolated incident.
That's true. Yes.
All right.
She was leash reactive too. Like when I used to live in the city and walk her, she just was like, and I used to take her to another daycare and they didn't know what to do with her because she was leash aggressive,
So reactive, whatever the word.
And so it was just about really, so it's a misconception, right? That translates all the time.
Right. And so, again, we label dogs. We can't label dogs just like we can't label children, right? If a child steals candy when it's 3 years old, it's not necessarily a kleptomaniac that's going to steal for the rest of its life.
And just because dogs get into a scuffle or a fight doesn't mean that they are aggressive. Exactly to, what happened with Maggie, because she's been with other dogs and been completely fine. So
right. And again, we go back to the fact they don't have thumbs, they don't have hands, so they play with their teeth. They have canine teeth. They wrestle. Sometimes they wrestle very vocally, very firmly. They toss and turn. That's not a dog fight. It's play.
And when dogs have a bigger amount of space, so when they're in the playroom, they are free to move, so they don't feel like they're being cornered or they're, to your point, on a leash, and they don't have any free will. And that's the biggest difference.
Yes, absolutely.
And the dog will understand that he can play and interact. Right. So let's move on to the second myth. We got to get at least two in here.
So let's get two myths in.
Okay, and this is kind of actually a good segue. So I don't know if anyone's seen this story lately about a dog and a woman who were walking, and a mountain lion came into their path or something, and the dog went to attack the mountain lion. And the narrative is that the dog was protecting the owner, right? So there's a myth and misconception in that, right? That when dogs react a certain way, they're protecting us.
Right.
And you always say the dog's actually protecting themselves.
Right. So we'd like to think, and again, this is anthropomorphism, so we think that a dog, when it's tethered to us and it starts growling or barking at something, we'd like to say the dog is protecting us. But the fact of the matter is the dog is protecting himself, and he's tethered to you, and he can't go anywhere. If he was off a leash, he'd probably run the other way, because most acts of aggression by dogs are fear motivated.
Right.
It's very rarely dominant,
right. Yeah.
And most dogs would have to be trained to be protective. They just don't domestic dogs are not. They have what we call a bite inhibition. They're bred not to bite people.
Right.
So for people to think, and it's the same in the house when people say, oh, he's a bad guard dog. If somebody comes in my house, they'll kill him because it's having this out-of-body apoplectic experience when it hears noises. But the truth of the matter is it's all based on fear. It has nothing to do with the human. It has to do with the lack of leadership from the human. So the dog has to take the role. Does that make sense?
Yeah, he feels he has to kind of protect himself.
He has to protect himself because you're holding him on a leash.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's a lot of we hear a lot of that. And
that's a myth.
Yeah.
Unless you trained him for what we call protection work.
Right. But that's not the common domestic dog.
No, it's fear motivated. We see it all the time in our openings. People come in and say the dog's afraid of men, or he's going to growl. And the way we deal and manage dogs, it just doesn't happen. It's a projection. It's a human projection of emotion on dogs that don't share the same emotional level as you.
Right.
Go ahead.
Okay, how about the third myth in that, and this happens more often in the winter, right? But got me thinking about it since it's getting hot. Mm-hmm. And how dogs regulate their body temperature. So the third myth is dogs need shoes or some type of, footwear especially in the winter when it's cold out.
Right. So here it is. And all these things are debatable, by the way. I'll give you my opinion based on my knowledge and experience. And my knowledge and experience is based on interacting with 3 million dogs over the years. 3 million dogs of all shapes, sizes, temperaments. So So let's talk about jackets. And I see it. I'm down in Florida. It's 73 degrees or 65 degrees, and to Floridian it's cold, so they put a jacket on their Chihuahua. This is insanity. Booties are insane. Dogs navigate with their feet. It's very important. I had my friend on from Ground Zero. When we were at Ground Zero, there was hot, steamy, sharded glass, but dogs have a tremendous ability to navigate with their paws. So to put jackets on dogs, if you're going for a 3-mile walk or 4-mile walk, it's not necessary. Now, obviously, you got to take dogs they thermal regulate.
Right. It's a misconception about how dogs control their body temperature, right? And also in the heat, dogs release heat from their pads.
Thank you.
So if you're putting something on the dog's feet, even if it's just prevent the feet from getting dirty, they actually can't regulate their body temperature that well.
Thank you. Shaving your dog in the summer. If you have a long-haired dog, a husky or a Saint Bernard, shaving the dog is common sense to the human, but the hair on a dog is insulation. So it's actually what you think you're doing a dog a favor with your anthropomorphic brain. Shaving their insulation. It's like taking the insulation out of your
and that's
house.
why double-coated dogs, they'll lose their bottom coat, but the top coat is actually important to regulate body temperature. And dogs don't sweat through their skin like we do.
Right.
So
Their
that's
mouth.
why they release through their paw pads and by panting. That's how they regulate.
Right. And they'll self-regulate, meaning your dog in the hot sun, our dogs dig a hole and they lay in the cold hole. So this is nature. This is my problem. Humans, how intelligent we are, we start to apply human common sense to dogs. So just because you might dress your 2-year-old child up to go out in the snow, a dog has double layers of hair and leather. Or double layers of hair for the most part. Now, of course, we've mutated dogs into little tiny Italian greyhounds.
Right.
So they're not going to be as resilient in cold weather as a husky. Huskies live in the snow. St. Bernards live in the snow. We've had over the years outdoor dogs. They got stressed out coming into our home.
They did because they just couldn't regulate their temperature inside. So, but that is a myth about the paw pads. So, paw pads for dogs are like eyes to us. So they have to be able to have them free so they can navigate the world with them.
Of course, yes, Jack.
All right, let's see what else do we got here. Okay. We got 2 minutes left.
Oh, that's so sad.
All right.
What do you
Let's
got?
Let's do a second episode and finish up the other 2 myths. We'll talk about
dogs.
Breed discrimination, why breed doesn't matter, and that dogs need large spaces instead of small, more compact.
Okay, good. That's a good episode because these are all, if you don't know what the word anthropomorphic is, just add that one big word to your vocabulary because it describes every challenge you have as a pet owner and the challenge we have as pet care providers dealing with anthropomorphism. Thanks again for listening to The Dish on Dogs. I told you this was informative. The next episode is going to be even more informative. I'm your host, Mike Gould, Mayor of Houndstown, USA, signing off.
See you later. Thanks for watching another exciting episode of the Dish on Dogs podcast. You can also watch us on YouTube on the Dish on Dogs podcast. If you're a listener, you can catch us on iTunes, Spotify, and all your other podcast platforms. For more information, click the link in the description. We'll see everybody next time.